Population Viability Seminar. This week we're going to be talking about gray wolves. So, let's begin. Even though I'm not there, you can always email me questions that you have about this presentation. Please remember, after Thanksgiving, you will be giving a short presentation on your own population viability studies. We're going to be talking about the western gray wolves and viable populations. Gray wolves went from the top predator in most of North America to being almost extinct in less than 100 years. Gray wolves covered much of North America, and until recently, most people had a very negative view of wolves. Wolves are important as top predator, but people dislike them really from colonial days. Those of you who might have read Little House on the Prairie, Little House in the Big Woods, realize that many of the settlers in the western part of the United States had to contend with wolves. Probably one of the most egregious things that wolves did was dig up graves of people along the Oregon Trail and other covered wagon trails. What is a viable population for wolves? And we're only recently realizing the job they do in ecosystems in controlling prey populations, deer, moose, and elk. Wolves were most famously reintroduced to the Yellowstone ecosystems. Small populations of wolves have existed in Maine and around the Great Lakes areas, but wolves were almost completely eradicated from the Rocky Mountains by poisoning an active bounty on wolves who were considered vermin. Wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone ecosystem in 1995. They had been missing from that ecosystem for over 70 years. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service worked 20 years to get wolves reintroduced. How many wolves do you need for them to do their job as top predators in ecosystems? Well, first we have to start out is what is a biological species and what is an ecological species. In order for there to be a species reintroduction, the species has to be absent from an ecosystem. There was much debate about whether there were or were not wolves remaining in the Yellowstone ecosystem. Finally, U.S. Fish and Wildlife decided that the wolves were being reintroduced for ecological reasons, that they needed to take on their role as top predators, particularly to control elk populations. So, as you might remember, in ecology, you had a discussion of what is a biological species, morphological species, recognition species, cohesion species, and ecological species concept. In species reintroduction and wildlife management, the biological species is key. This is the species that needs to be identified in the Endangered Species Act, that it is in truth a real sustainable species. But there's also the ecological species role. That is, the species plays the role as a top predator, a top consumer or producer in a system. All right, so what were wolves and why was this such a debate? The species description, Canis lupus, describes a large canine predator that covers most of North America. It would be quite large, over 2.5 feet high at the shoulder, 50 to 100 pounds, with males being larger than females. However, because Canis lupus had such a broad range, even across Eurasia and North America, it had several species or races. Wolves were highly distributed, highly mobile, and abundant throughout much of North America. They were greatly feared, but in the early days, wolves were very mobile. Your chances of running into a wolf pack were relatively rare. Ecologists believe that there were 6 races or subspecies of wolves. The present range, you can see, is quite restricted to Alaska and northern Canada. The historic range extended well down through all of North America, wolves being absent from the. the southeastern U.S. and in Baja California. Wolves were well adapted. They occurred as Appalachian groups, Mexican or arid Southwest wolves, Rocky Mountain wolves, Alaskan wolves, Great Lakes Canadian shield wolves, and Maritime province wolves in the far eastern United States. If we contrast the subspecies of wolves that now exist in the lower 48 states, we had red wolves that occur in the Appalachians. There is a project in North Carolina to restore red wolves to the Appalachian Mountains. There are the northern Rocky Mountain wolves, which historically occurred along the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains through the present-day Yellowstone ecosystem. And then Mexican gray wolves that are somewhat smaller, longer-legged, adapted to arid and drier conditions down through Mexico and Texas. Here are 3 YouTube videos that you can watch on the background information on wolves. The first one is excellent in describing the ecological role of wolves in the Yellowstone ecosystem. In this video, you're going to see how scientists figured out that wolves were responsible for preying on elk, scattering elk, and then increasing plant diversity in Yellowstone. If it wasn't for the wolves, the elk would overgraze aspen, willow, and other critical plants that are important for sustaining the Yellowstone ecosystem. The second video talks about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone, and you can see some spectacular footage of the wolf packs in Yellowstone. But this was not without controversy. A lot of people opposed wolf reintroduction because wolves were wide-ranging, they are highly mobile, and they are not going to stay in parks. So wolves will move out of parks, and in areas where wolves were absent for 70 years, there are many livestock interests, and wolves will prey on cattle, sheep. This event is called deprivation. Wolf deprivation is one of the major reasons why people oppose wolf reintroduction. Let's look at the wolf status now. The reintroduction to Yellowstone National Park in 1995 was considered spectacularly successful because from that original 41 wolves, large number of wolves occur now. They have been delisted. They are no longer listed on the Endangered Species Act. They are a protected wild animal. They were federally delisted in March 2009 with an annual review of state management plans. So, the wolf is alive and well in the western United States, though with a very uneasy alliance with cattle ranchers, sheep farmers, and also other recreational interests. Let's just look at the ecology of wolves. This is a dynamic area of research. Packs are formed, and the size of these packs are dependent upon the amount of prey. Wolves are the primary predators on moose, elk, and deer. The greatest cause of mortality for wolves in Yellowstone now is being killed by other wolves. Wolves are intensely territorial. There's a tremendous amount of competition between packs, and they will control their own population size based on food availability. But humans play a role in this. There are some introduced diseases, and the risk of introduced diseases to wolf populations being canines from humans are high. Wolves are susceptible to parvoviruses, rabies, distemper, and they can be transferred parasites like canine scabies and ticks from domestic dog populations. In 1995, this map shows the territory of wolves in Yellowstone National Park. You can see that they were concentrated in the northeastern part of the park area. Some packs were not radio tagged. You can see the approximate area in colored polygons of packs where at least one member of the pack was radio tagged. Contrast this to wolf packs in 2012. You can see that some packs have disappeared, new packs have appeared. Almost all the packs spend part of their time outside of Yellowstone National Park. So wolf packs are highly dynamic, they're mobile, they're rapidly expanding outside the national park into Wyoming, Idaho, Montana. Wolves are a tremendous draw. Over 60% of park visitors to Yellowstone National Park come to see wolves. Wolves here can be viewed in the late fall and early spring when the elk are down in the Lamar Valley. This is a spectacular opportunity for people using wildlife viewing lenses to see the dynamics of packs and, if they're lucky enough, even see a wolf bring down an elk. But there are threats to wolves today. Even though wolves have been successful and introduced to Yellowstone National Park, they're getting this canine scabies. These are small mites that burrow into the skin of the wolf and the hair follicle. They were introduced to control wolves and coyotes to wild populations 60 years ago. But now they're being picked up by the wild wolves and are creating a problem. Wildlife managers are being forced to pay close attention to the political and sociological aspects of wildlife management rather than just the biological aspects. It is very disconcerting for visitors to Yellowstone to see wolves like this juvenile wolf. You can see some rough areas here. All of this is due to canine scabies. This juvenile wolf has lost a lot of hair on the lower parts of its body. It will reduce the chance of this young wolf in surviving with the upcoming winter. It's been a lot of energy scratching and chewing at its skin. It's a pretty miserable existence. A lot of park visitors wish that the Park Service would go in and treat the wolves or some way treat the scabies on the wolves. But this is against Park Service policy. It's adding an additional risk of mortality in young wolves, particularly juveniles. Young of the year wolves don't have the body mass to survive long winters without their full coat of fur. This web link will take you to one of the more popular Yellowstone blogs on this wolf mange and how it creates a lot of distress among people who come to see the wolves and value the wildlife in Yellowstone. Now, what's the status of these northern Rocky Mountain wolves? At this point, the most available data, which is produced each year by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is that there's 1,674 adult wolves, at least 321 packs. Packs can vary in size. 103 breeding pairs. The population has exceeded its recovery goal for 11 consecutive years, but again, each state has to manage its wolf population. Some states allow for a limited wolf hunt. This brings in a large amount of money, but also helps control the number of wolves. Conservationists, environmentalists argue for a much larger population to be sustainable. States, and particularly cattle interests, arguing for a lower amount of wolves that is a viable population. Okay, so let's get back to the reading and the article that you read on Isle Royale. Isle Royale is a national park in Lake Superior. This is just north of northern Michigan, and this island is created by glacial action during the Pleistocene. It is a long, ridged island with lots of boreal forest, aspen white birch forests. It is just the type of vegetation that moose like to browse on. Isle Royale, as you can see, is very close to Canada. There is a land bridge. It's probably about 19 miles at the shortest point. When Lake Superior freezes over completely, this ice bridge was used by moose first around 1900 to migrate to the island, and they found rich grazing there, and then followed later by a few wolves that walked across the ice bridge to prey on the moose. So Isle Royale is one of the longest running study areas for predator-prey interactions. All of you who took ecology saw the predator-prey, Lactovolcera type models looking at moose-wolf interactions on Isle Royale over time. Okay, here's the problem is really looking at how to manage a small isolated population of wolves. Remember, this is not natural for the species. They once occupied huge areas, controlled species across a continent, and likely wolf packs traveled, appeared, and disappeared from areas with waxing and waning of prey populations. You can see the moose population trends from 1958 to 2010. They reached a high in 1995 of over 2,000 wolves, or 2,000 moose. The wolf population reached a high in the late 1980s of 50 wolves. Now they're down to 19. Even more recently, they're down to about 7 individuals with no offspring born in 2013. Blue color being the wolves. Now, look here at the bottom. The blue diamonds signify the number of years it was cold enough for the ice bridge to form. Okay, so you need 2 events. You need the ice bridge to form, and then you need animals that may randomly migrate across it, hear something, smell something, and take on that journey across the ice. So there has to be some event, maybe lack of food, maybe lots of excess juveniles that will drive the animals to migrate across this ice bridge. Okay, but look in recent years how few times the ice bridge is formed. Climate change may change this experiment, and the frequency of ice bridge formation is decreasing as winters become warmer and shorter in the northern part of the United States. So we've had a die-off of the wolves. We've had stochastic events in small populations driving the wolves to less than 10 individuals, while the moose are resurging up to 1,000 individuals. Okay, there's been plenty of studies on the importance of wolves on Isle Royale. Even the Park Service will admit, as long as there are moose on Isle Royale, there needs to be wolves in order to maintain or control the moose population and protect plant species, plant growth, and prevent overgrazing. You know, the wolves do this in 2 ways. They don't just prey on the sick and the young. They keep the moose off guard. They force the moose to move around a lot more, and they don't stay and overgraze in one area. All right, the second article, it kind of goes into what's the real meat and potatoes, looking at population genetics of very, very small populations to do these integrated projection models. These integrated projection models allow to look at small populations, look at trends. The second article, looking at coat color of wolves, helps us understand what are the effects on population. As you all know, in doing your population viability analysis, you can do a model, but populations are not easy to predict. Wolves have very complex life history. That means that there are many opportunities for rare or stochastic events to change the population dynamics. In the article you read about Old Gray Guy, one male wolf coming across and then basically taking over breeding for the packs on Isle Royale. Also, wolves continue to be a key research system to understand the influence of population size, climate change, and environmental factors on species success. Gray wolves might be one of our most important systems for studying the effects of reintroduced and founder populations and How will this species survive into the future from coming back from very small numbers and restricted ranges like Isle Royale, where the wolves are constrained to an island, or in Yellowstone, where wolves are constrained to parks and protected areas and unwelcome out on private lands? All right, so go back and look at those two articles on gray wolves and their emerging role as really a keystone species, as a top predator in controlling prey populations. Think of many areas in which the prey can overgraze areas and the importance of wolves in controlling these grazer and herbivore populations. Okay, so you can go back and look at that article on integrated projection models. Just really don't worry about the math, but reflect upon the importance of stochastic events, a string of harsh winters, a string of very warm winters, in controlling the outcome of populations, and particularly small populations, into the future. Okay, so spend some time going over these articles and preparing your presentations. We will meet again then on the 2nd of December, and everybody have a happy Thanksgiving.